All right, picking back up where we left off. I did get some bearings on the existing hub front disc, which of course the passenger side was in good shape. So I changed out the bearings, cleaned up the wheel, cleaned up all the wheels, and put that back together. Now on the passenger side, that's where it was pretty bad shape. That hub is compromised as far as getting the cap back on. It was just pretty much a mess. So I will definitely have to get a new part there. But just to get this thing as a roller, I went ahead and installed bearings on it just so I didn't tear up the spindle any more than it's already torn up. Also note that that locking nut was boogered up, so I basically had to grind the cap screw off just so I could kind of get back that together. And there's a special washer that was missing. It was chewed up as well. It was gone. So anyway, I was able to get the car down off the lift, push it out of the way on skates because the front tires are completely flat, and then get my wife's Macan up there for an oil change. So that's what I did yesterday. Now today, I've already started cleaning up under this long, and this is the first area I'm going to attack as far as metal work. I've got to clean that up some more. This is going to be a patch, which I've done this spot before. It's not that hard. It'll require a little bit of fabrication on some sheet metal to make it conform with that area. So the first step is basically just clean it up, find fresh metal around all the edges where you're going to weld in your patch. And when you're in there with a wire brush, it will keep opening up, but until you get to the fresh, shiny metal. So that's what I'm going to do. Also note, let me turn the light on here, that way up top there is impossible to get to without cutting the fender off. That fender is not bolted on, it's part of the body. It's welded on at the factory. So I've got a little trick I do up in there. Basically, I'm going to extend the patch up in there to kind of conform with the top edge. And then I'll weld as much as I can in there, overlap the existing metal, rust treat everything with a metal prep to kill the rust. And then I'll potentially put some pop rivets in the top edge just because I can't reach up in there with my MIG welder or something. I'll fix it up there somehow and then seam seal. Of course, all these patches will get seam sealer eventually, seam seal the whole thing. And the way I look at it is if you get good weld all along here, all the way up here, and then, if this top section cannot be welded because you just can't physically get your welder up in there, that really helps this whole section at least be structural. And because it's behind the rocker cover, it doesn't have to be pretty anyway. It just needs to be structural, and you need to stop the rust as much as possible. Note that on 914, you're never going to stop the rust unless you completely strip the car down, put the chassis in some kind of acid bath, and then treat all the metal and then paint it with some type of rust inhibiting paint. I mean, because it's non-galvanized sheet metal. Unless you did all that, it's always going to rust. So all you're doing is slowing the damage down. And that and keeping it indoors and keeping it dry goes a long way. Anyway, I'll walk you through this first patch. So after cleaning up, I'm going to mark it where I'm going to cut it. Now note this piece got a little bit bigger because as I was cleaning, I found it had separated down here at the bottom. So I'm going to try to get right to the back of the car where that separation stops. And also to mark my cuts, I'm going to use this piece of really thin galvanized sheet metal scrap, because I can bend it and conform it to these contours and keep nice straight lines. And then hopefully we can get this segment out all in one piece and take it to the bench and use the cutout section as a template for our good metal. Another way to do that is to use a cardboard, which after you mark your cuts, you could put the cardboard in there and pre-cut the cardboard. But I think I can get this whole piece out and intact and just use it and conform to it. We'll see how that goes. So I've done my initial cuts with a grinder, mini grinder with a cutting wheel. I think it's probably a 1/4 inch. It's a little bit big, but that's what I had on hand. Now I got to follow up with either a Dremel with a cutting wheel or something smaller to get up in those tight areas. So I usually try to get whatever I can with the big grinder. Because the little one's much slower. I also have a body saw, but that doesn't really get in the tight spots like the Dremel does. Yep. So I had to kind of finish it up with the body saw because those little Dremel wheels are just burning through them. They're too thin. And this is very typical. You know, nothing surprising here. You can see as you get further back in the longitudinal, the metal looks pretty good up top at least. But obviously all through here where it goes up. So what I'm going to do is vacuum this out really, really good and treat it with rust kill, and hopefully we can mitigate this damage. As the rust kill is doing its work, and you need to let it sit for 20 or 30 minutes, and then you're supposed to rinse with water, which really seems counterintuitive. And then I'll get in there with a heat gun and just dry the hell out of it. Let me show you something here on the piece that I cut out. Note that it's actually 2 layers of metal, and that's some reinforcing inside of that long that starts, I think it starts about at the jack plate and then goes to the rear of the car. Not sure how long, but if you were to replace that whole longitudinal inside of the fender well with a piece from Restoration Design, actually has that metal segment. It has those 2 layers of metal complete. It's ready to go. However, you would have to remove the fender, so, which I'm not going to do. So I'm just going to do a patch, single layer of metal, stop the rust, keep it fairly structural. It's not going to be a race car. It just needs strength and you know, reliability, and we'll just call it done. So after applying the rust kill, you should get that ashen color. Looks like the bottom still has a red to it. Could probably get rid of that if I got in there and wire brushed. But it's such a tight spot. Note I got a bolt there from the cover. I can extract that because I had to shear it off. If I get in there with a wire brush, I'm just going to be opening up more holes. All this will have to be addressed, I mean, eventually. But bottom line, I can take care of this. I just need to clean up around the edges and get it ready for weld. So I followed up with some weld through primer, just more or less to make me feel good. I don't know that it's going to stop the rust, but certainly looks better. And next is to start forming up the metal. All right, here's a start. Just keep shaping, bending, and where we have to make these cuts, we'll do little welds. I'll do rosette welds along the bottom. I'll do a seam weld up the front edge there. It'll mate up right there with the jack plate. That'll work nice. And then lap weld on the back side because it's lapping over the metal, and should be pretty good. And here's what we end up with. So got some good solid welds. My welding work ain't the best, but gets the job done. Grinder fixes everything. So obviously up top, need to get a bunch of seam sealer up there to close that up. But at least we got good solid metal right here at this juncture, and hopefully won't have to go to this extreme on the driver's side. Okay, hope y'all learned something. Hopefully it was good and not bad habits.